Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Zevachim Daf Ayin Daled. Today's stuff is sponsored by Judy Shapiro on the 18th year outside of her father, Albert Teichman, Zichrono Lebracha. I hope and pray that his neshama is uplifted by his loving family. We miss him very much. Today's stuff is dedicated by Shiur Dishon in memory of her son, Eitan Dishon, Zichrono Lebracha. I thank my eldest son, Staff Sergeant Eitan Dishon. In his merit, I was introduced to the Hadran family, and I've continued learning the Daf Yomi for the second year since his heroic fall in Gaza. Since the time his story was released for publication, it has also been released for inspiration, uplifting many to continue learning and to connect with the eternity of Israel. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Okay, we're going to get started with a continuation of the sugya from yesterday, which is then going to lead to kind of another sugya from there. We're going to get not completely off. We're still going to be in the same general topic, but you'll kind of see the thread that goes throughout. So we're going to start with Rava. Rava yesterday, if you recall, Rava had said that the whole reason why, when we have these animals that got mixed up together, in case number one, where we have isurei hana'ah, items that are forbidden, and then we have an animal, right, one animal that's forbidden mixed up with all these other animals, theoretically, we could use the statistical majority of scatter them around, then each one you take is going to be permitted based on the statistical majority. However, it's a gzeirah because maybe if we allow that, then people will do it also when they're stationary. And that then the statistical majority doesn't work. It's 50-50 and it's going to be a problem. Then Rava said, well, according to this, once the rabbis forbade this, if you sacrifice it, it won't be accepted. And then we said, what about this other source with the birds and kinim, where it is accepted? And then we said, those are based on two different approaches. If an animal is alive, can it be nidche, called a reject, which means once it's a reject, we can't ever offer it on the altar, even if it becomes not rejected, or in this case, just gets sacrificed. So that's a machlok. And that resolved that issue. But now the Gemara says, last line of Ayin Gimel Amud Bet, Harei shchutim delekule ama nidchim. But wait, once animals are slaughtered, everybody agrees that it's nidche, right? The whole machloket is when they're still alive. Once they're dead, and then you have, let's say, blood that becomes disqualified. Once it's disqualified, you can't offer it on the altar anymore. That's a basic, obvious halacha. So wait a minute. And that was the assumption of this sugya, right? They argue about when they're alive, but there's no argument once they're slaughtered. Well, Tanan, it says in a Mishna later in our chapter, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Im karev harosh, harosh shel echad mehem, yikrevu kol harashim. Sounds a little unpleasant, but you're supposed to burn the head of the animal of a korban olah. Now, if you have a bunch of limbs of animals that most of them were good, valid sacrifices, and some were from blemished animals, and they got mixed up together. If you sacrifice one of them, now obviously when they're all mixed up, what's the situation? They're forbidden to offer on the altar, right? So they were nidche after slaughtering because they're body parts right now. And then what? Because they got mixed up after the slaughter, right? After the slaughter, everything got mixed up together. The whole pile now is forbidden to use. But here comes this big heter for Rabbi Eliezer, and that's going to really what's going to connect this to our next sugya. If the Kohen went anyway and slaughtered and burnt one of the heads on the altar, yikrivu kol harashim. At that point, you can offer the rest, burn them on the altar. Why is this? Very interesting theory. It's going to be, I think, a little hard to understand, but I think you can spend at least a year analyzing and understanding the stuff more in depth. I will just tell you. We call this tolim. What is tolim? We hang it on this. Okay, what does that mean? We can now make an assumption, because it's in the world of assumptions, that the one that you burned on the altar is the bad one. And therefore, all the rest are permitted. We're going to have one little caveat about this later, okay? But right now, it sounds like you could just take all the other heads and burn them on the altar. So that's a clear case. All the other heads were completely rejected when they got mixed up with the blemished one, and now we're going to allow it. How could that be? To which they answer, Hu de Amal ke Chanan Mitzri. He holds by an outlying position, okay, by a single one person's opinion, which now we see it's two. It's Chanan Mitzri and Rabbi Eliezer. But remember, Rabbi Eliezer is a Tana. He was in a Mishna. So these two Tanaim hold this way. Now, Chanan Mitzri isn't talking about tarovot. Okay, we're talking about tarovot, mixtures, intermingled items. That's our topic, and that's why it's in our chapter. But Chanan Mitzri was just talking about the issue of dichui in general. Now, Chanan Mitzri was seen before. Let's go back to Yom Kippur. The Yom Kippur ceremony, one of the things you have to do is bring two goats and have a lottery. One goes to God, one gets sacrificed as an olah, one goes to Azazel, gets sent off a cliff. Now, one of the things is you have to have them both in existence, right, for the lottery and until the sacrifice is done. If the animal, the one for Azazel, drops dead before we finish sacrificing the other animal, you have to start from the beginning because at that point, let's go through it. This is dachui. At the moment the other animal dies, the second one that's supposed to be brought on the altar is rejected at that moment. You can't sacrifice it while there's no other parallel goat. So what do you have to do? You have to start from the beginning, basically. Okay? You have to go find two more goats, do a lottery, okay? And that's if it happens later. Now, it says here, according to Chanan Mitzri, afilu dam bekos, even if the blood is in the cup, and you've already done everything, and you're about to sprinkle the blood, and the Shiur Lazazel drops dead, mevi chavero mezaveglo. Now, even though it's rejected right now, and here comes the big chidush, I don't hold by dichui. Even though it's rejected right now, all you have to do is get another goat. As soon as you get that other goat, we can then finish the process. Okay, he doesn't hold like the other opinions that you have to start from the beginning and get another pair. But no, you can just pair it up and continue. So we must say that Rabbi Eliezer must hold like him. And that's why, even though it's true, everyone holds, once it's slaughtered, it's dachui, almost everyone holds that. Okay, there is this outlying opinion. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Rav. Now you're going to see why we bring this. This is a different case. We're not anymore in the world of sacrifices. Now we're talking about, and we're going to have a whole bunch of cases today. Some about avodah zarah, some about truma, but all sorts of cases of, again, trying to use laws of nullification. In all these cases, we're not really going to use laws of nullification. And why is that? Because all the cases we're going to discuss are things of importance, of significance. So, or maybe because they're avodah zarah, which also has different laws. So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Ravua, Amar Rav. Okay, so remember, this is Rav Nachman. Okay, we can skip the middle person right now. Rav Nachman speaking in the name of Rav. Tabat shel avodah zarah. We have a ring of avodah zarah, okay, that was used for idol worship, forbidden to benefit from. Shenit arva b'mea tabaot. Now it gets mixed up with another 100 rings. V'nafla achat mehem liyam gadol. Now you're going to see why we're bringing this case, because it's just like one of the heads that was sacrificed on the altar. If one falls into the Mediterranean, hutru kulam, all the rest are permitted. Why? Damrinan hachtin afal hainu disura. Because we can say, oh, the one that fell, we can assume that was the one that was forbidden. Okay, which again is quite okay. If you're starting to think, how does that work with our sugya, right? So, Eitive Rava Rav Nachman. Rava says to Rav Nachman, okay, wait a minute. This does not match at all. What are you talking about, Rav Nachman? This doesn't match with our Mishnah. Look at what our Mishnah says. Afilu achad beribo yamutu kulan. Remember, intermingled animals, one shor haniskal, let's say, one that was supposed to get stoned, and the rest were fine. And what do we say? We have to leave them all to die. Now, according to what you're saying, amai. Nema, now we understand you're not going to go sacrifice one on the altar because it might be the forbidden one, but Nema de meat, isura meat. Well, one of them is going to die before the others, right? We're not going to all die at exactly the same minute. As soon as one of them dies, we could say, the one that died was the shor niskal. Now we can permit all the others. If this is a solution, why don't we use it in our Mishnah? And again, what do you see? They keep trying to say, how are we letting all these animals die? Amarle, Rav Damar, Rabbi Eliezer. Oh, it's fine because our Mishnah doesn't match Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. It's a unique opinion. Rav held like Rabbi Eliezer, like this unique opinion, did not. And now we're going to quote Rabbi Eliezer, which we already did. That's why I said that's the string that's kind of connecting that previous sugya to this one. That's why we got here. Rabbi Eliezer Omer. Okay, so we match it up to Rabbi Eliezer and we're good. Except there's one more point. And when I quoted you Rabbi Eliezer, I said that we're going to have one caveat to his opinion. It doesn't work as simply as we said. So that's what they're going to say. But ha-amar Rabbi Eliezer. Now, don't confuse Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is an Emora from Israel. right? Student of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Eliezer said about Rabbi Eliezer, okay, explaining his position, lo hitir, so we don't really know what Rabbi Eliezer said, but according to Rabbi Eliezer, lo hitir Rabbi Eliezer, ela shnayim shnayim, aval echad echad lo. Rabbi Eliezer only permitted, now what did he say? We can sacrifice all the other heads. Now again, this seemed weird to us, right? We can assume that one was good and it permits all the others. Wait, you need two things, according to Rabbi Eliezer, the way he understood Rabbi Eliezer. Number one, you can say the one that fell in is good, is the bad one, okay? And that permits the others, but it only permits them if you do them in pairs. Why in pairs? Because if you take them on the altar, it's still possible, in fact, likely, that the forbidden one is still in the mixture, right? So when we take those animals and sacrifice them on the altar, we want to have a situation. Now, it's a little bit weird. It still doesn't really make 100% sense, but, okay, we're sacrificing, if we sacrifice two heads at the same time, we definitely have a permitted one in there because there's only one forbidden one. So if we do it in pairs, we're guaranteeing that your act of burning on the altar includes a permitted one. And that's going to allow it. If you do it in pairs, then at least you have a permitted one. Now, it doesn't really explain, but maybe it's the forbidden one, okay? But we combine these two things. Number one, we can claim that was the Isser, but we don't completely hold that, so we do two together, and two together is going to help us because at least there's heter mixed in. If worst case, there's Isser there too. Okay, so that's not what Rav Nachman said. Rav Nachman said, once your tabat falls in, you can permit all the other 100. So, and if he's holding by Rabbi Eliezer, and the way Rabbi Eliezer understood it, then he should have said, you can sell them two at a time. So, ana nami amarle, ana nami tarte kamina. Oh yeah, that's what I meant. I didn't mean that you can use each one individually. I only meant you can use them in pairs. Okay, so if you're selling them, let's say, you sell them in pairs. Okay, there's a debate among the commentaries, I believe I read this about, maybe you have to sell them for a little less money, just in case, right? You can't benefit from avodah zarah, okay? But you can sell them, but not exactly for the full price or something like that. But in any case, he says he allows it. Okay, now, we're going to get back to what you're saying, Becky, about being machmir on avodah zarah. Shmuel's going to disagree with Rav, specifically about avodah zarah. So you got the right thinking, but not, Rav thought it was fine. Now, another case of Rav with avodah zarah, different. Amar Rav, tabat shel avodah zarah. Shenit arva b'mea tabaot. Okay, we have one ring of avodah zarah that gets mixed up with 100. So far, same case. But now we're going to have a different scenario. Pershu arba'im lemakom achad, v'shishim lemakom achad. So now 40 went one way, 60 went the other way. Persha chamer arba'im, if one comes out of that 40, eno seret. We're not going to forbid it. If we take out one, we're going to say, that one's not forbidden. Echamishishim oseret. But if we take one out of the 60, it's forbidden. So the Gemara asks, Mishna chamer arba'im delo. Damrina nisur beruba ite. Right? In other words, what's the thing with the 1 in 40? Because we say, what do we assume? If it was in the 100, and then we split 60-40, so we'll say it was probably in the 60. So if we take one out of the 40, it's fine. But you could say the same thing with the 1 in 60, because chamishishim nami amrina, isur beruba ite. Now, fine, maybe it's in the 60, but if I take one out, if we go by majority, so 1 out of 60, we can assume it's in the other 59. So I don't really get it. So they say, no. Here's how to understand what Rav said. Ela im pershu arba'im kulam lemakom echad, ein oschot. Shishim lemakom echad oschot. If you have 40 in one place, they don't forbid. 60 one place, they do forbid. What does it mean, forbid, not forbid? It means that if you had 60, and then, you split it into 40-60, and then the 40 and 60 mixed up in a bunch of others. So we now have what we call sveka, on the 40 side, not on the 60 side. So on the 60 side, we assume it was in the 60, and therefore when the 60 mixes up with another batch, it's just a doubt about, right, the one you're taking now, is it from the forbidden or is it permitted? But on the 40 side, we have what we call a sveka, which is a doubt and within it, and then another doubt. We have two doubts. How does that work? Well, maybe, right, likely it's in the 60, not the 40. And now that 40 mixed in with another batch, and we want to take one of them out, right? It's very likely it came from the permitted. So we already have two doubts, and two doubts we're going to permit, and not one doubt. Okay, so there we have a heter within Avodah Zarah for a sfeik. On that point, Shmuel is going to disagree. Kiamarita kamed Shmuel. Now, according to some of the girsas, I didn't mention this, but it said Amar Rav here, but many girsas would have Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, which makes a lot more sense with the continuation. Rav Yehuda passed down the name of Rav, and then Rav Yehuda comes in and says, this happens all the time, where he teaches something he learned with Rav, and if you remember, he became Shmuel's student after Rav died. So he goes to Shmuel and he says, and then he tells us the story. When I told this in front of Shmuel, Amar Li said to me, many times, you bring the halacha of Rav, and Shmuel would say, what are you talking about? Hanach lavodah zarah shesfeka asura ad sof haolam. He says there's never, right? You can have sfek, you can have sfek on a sfek on a sfek. Never works. You have one that falls into 100, right? Falls into 100. And one from there falls into another 100. One from there falls into another 100. Doesn't matter. It's always going to be forbidden because it's avodah zarah. We're going to be strict about it. So, Meitive. Now we have a difficulty on Shmuel from a Braita because the Braita says, so we have, in other words, Rav is going to be lenient on a sfek and avodah zarah. Shmuel is not going to be lenient. So now, again, I just want to remind you of the structure. We started with this thing about Rabbi Eliezer with the head, right? And then we said, oh, he's a unique opinion. That was all because we were talking about Balei Chayim Nitchim and this halacha of Rava. Then, because of that, we brought up this halacha of Rav that Rav Nachman quoted about one of the rings falling into the water. We can assume that was the one, as long as we then do everything in pairs. And now we're on a different, it happens to be the same case where one ring falls into 100, but we're in a totally different issue, which is sfeka. Just so you don't confuse, because it's a lot of cases, but they're different. So now we're talking about how sfeka works. So now the Gemara says meitive. But wait, how could Shmuel say this? Because look at this Braita. Safek avodah zarah asura, usfek sfeka muteret. Here it says, a safek in avodah zarah is forbidden, but a sfeka is permitted. It seems to go against Shmuel. Ketzad, let's see the case. How would be a case like this? It's going to be exactly parallel case, just not with a ring, with a cup. Kos shel avodah zarah shenafal le'otzar malei kosot. So we have a cup of avodah zarah that falls into a big, area full of kosot, a big storage area of cups. Kulan asurin, they're all forbidden. But peresh echad mehem l'ribo, umi ribo l'ribo mutarim. But if one of them fell into 10,000 cups, and it's one came out of that combination, where what the chances are the one that came out was forbidden, and then it goes into 10,000 other cups. Now, you could stop here, but they give two more, right? They say not only that, even, right, or ribo l'ribo, or all the more so, it'll be permitted. But even the first case is permitted. So it doesn't have to fall twice. It falls, right, it has to fall twice, but not more than that. It falls once into the 100, or whatever it was, didn't say an amount. One from there falls into another batch, that already becomes a sfek, because maybe, right, the one that came out was from there. Maybe now the one that we're going to take from there is not a problem. So now they say, so that goes against, says sfek and avodah zarah works. So why did Shmuel say it doesn't? Tanaihi. It's machloket tanaim. And now we're going to see the machloket tanaim, which is actually not in avodah zarah at all. So it's going to take a little while till we put all the pieces together. Ditanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rimone Badan. Remember those? That was in the list of the rabbis who said there's 6 items that are significant and are not nullified. Right? Because like I told you, today we're talking all about important things aren't nullified. Otherwise, regular laws and application would kick in. So we have pomegranates from Badan. They're oslim b'koshu, and they're orla, let's say. Okay, first 3 years on the tree, they're forbidden to eat. So now they get mixed. They're oslim b'koshu. Any amount of them is going to forbid a mixture. Ketzad. So what's an example? Nafal echad mehem l'toch ribo, umi ribo l'ribo asurin. If one of them falls into 10,000, one of those 10,000 falls into another batch of 10,000, they're all forbidden. That's Rabbi Yehuda, okay, who says never permitted. Notice, this isn't even avodah zarah. This is orla. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Omer Mishum Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda brings Rabbi Shimon's position and says l'ribo asurin. But if you take, so the 1 in 10,000 forbids all the 10,000, but if one comes out of that 10,000 and gets mixed up with 3, it's permitted. And if one from those 3, which is now 4, mixes in with something else, permitted. Okay? So he says sfek is permitted. Again, this is in orla, not in avodah zarah. So Shmuel Damar Keman. So now who does Shmuel hold like? Because Ikir Rabbi Yehuda Afilu B'Shari Surin Asul. Now Shmuel just said only in Avodah Zarah we don't hold by Sfeik Sfeika, and Rabbi Yehuda holds across the board. And Ika Rabbi Shimon, if he holds like Rabbi Shimon, afilu ba'avodah zarah nami shari. Rabbi Shimon seemingly permits also in avodah zarah. How do we know that? Well, the chitim, because if you want to say not, maybe he forbids it in avodah zarah and only permits it in the orla case. If you want to say shani leila Rabbi Shimon ben avodah zarah l'shari surin, then maybe he distinguishes, and maybe that's exactly Shmuel. Okay, that would fit perfectly. But what's the problem? Remember the Braita? Maybe you don't, but we just read this Braita. Elahad detanya safek avodah zarah asura usfek sfeka muteret. Now, if Rabbi Shimon is going to be machmir in avodah zarah, then everyone says sfek sfeka doesn't work in avodah zarah. Both Rabbi Shimon, both Rabbi Yehuda, and then this Braita that says that sfek sfeka is permitted in avodah zarah doesn't go like anybody's opinion. Mani lo Rabbi Yehuda v'lo Rabbi Shimon. So therefore, it must be La'olam Rabbi Shimon. The Braita must be Rabbi Shimon. Okay, the Braita must be saying, this is Rabbi Shimon's opinion, that both the Rimonim and the Avodah Zarah Sfeik is permitted. And Rabbi Yehuda must be saying both are forbidden, because if he forbids the Rimonim, for sure he forbids Avodah Zarah. And then Shmuel doesn't hold like either one of them, right? So how do we explain it? Shmuel savar Rabbi Yehuda bechada upalagale bechada. He agrees with Rabbi Yehuda about Avodah Zarah. He doesn't agree with Rabbi Yehuda about the Rimonim. Okay, so we end up having to say that Shmuel, Shmuel basically must hold like Rabbi Yehuda, but only partially like Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so that was all. Rav, who said Sfeik Sfeika works in Avodah Zarah. Shmuel, who says it doesn't work. And then basically we're going to say, this is a machloket Tanaim. And again, Shmuel's going to hold. Rabbi Yehuda thinks it doesn't ever work in things that are forbidden to benefit from, but Shmuel's going to take him and say, well, I'll agree with you partially, only in Avodah Zarah, not in other issues. Okay, Amar, now we just have to explain this thing about the three. Okay, we have to go back to Rabbi Shimon's opinion and try to explain something. So remember, if one fell into a 10,000 and one from the 10,001 now falls into 3, okay, it's going to be okay. Gemara is going to ask, turning now to Amabed, Mishna shlosha, why 3? Okay, why 3? Because there's majority now, right? 1 into 3, majority of permitted. But you can figure out what the question is. If you need majority, right? Mishna shlosha di karuba, shnaim nani karuba. If you just had it go into 2, it would have been a rove. Why do you have to say 3? What's the magic number 3 about? So my shlosha de katane, tarte vahu. When it said shlosha, it didn't really mean like I said that there's 4 in the end. So I specifically said it so you thought about it beforehand. And then you know when we got here what I was saying. What it really means 3 is that it falls into 2 and now you'll have 3. Okay? So altogether you'll end up with 3. That's answer number 1. Now this Ibayit Ema is a little bit unclear. Ibayit Ema means we have another answer. According to Rashi, this isn't coming to answer this question. This is coming to answer a previous question, okay, which is a little strange. Why would it be here? It sometimes happens because you end up kind of with a parenthetical sugya and then you go back. But Tosfot, I think, is more intuitive that this actually is a second answer to this question. So I'm going to go with Tosfot's interpretation here, which is Ibayit Ema Savalaki Rabbi Eliezer. Maybe he holds like Rabbi Eliezer. Which Rabbi Eliezer? Well, the Rabbi Eliezer that said, or which point about Rabbi Eliezer? Remember, we started with him about the heads. And what did we say? You have to have, right? You can sacrifice all the heads as long as you do it in pairs. So now we're going to say, if we want to say it's all permitted after, well, you have to have 2 pairs. If you don't have 4 in the end, you're not going to have 2 pairs, and that's not going to all be permitted because, right, it'll be permitted because if you put them in pairs, you could do it. If you have 3, you're going to do 1 with a pair, and 1's going to be left on its own. So that's a possible way of explaining that you really do need 4 in the end. Because then when 1 falls from there, right, it would be like, I guess, 2 or something. You have to figure out. So both of these answers, either Rashi and Tosfot, each one leaves open with some questions, which is why there's 2 opinions here. Neither one is perfect. Okay. Amarish Lakish. Now, so what we did is we got off on a tangent about the Sfeik Sfeika in Avodah Zarah, because we started with the statement of Rav that Rav Nachman quoted about, which held like Rabbi Eliezer, about the 1 falling into the sea. We got off on another topic about also 100 rings of Avodah Zarah, but a different issue of the if they kind of get separated and we can do Sfeik Sfeika. Now, right, if they get separated 40-60, from there we got into Shmuel and how he didn't agree. He thought Sfeik Sfeika is forbidden in Avodah Zarah. Now we're going back to the first halacha of Rav Nachman. Okay, and we're going to have something Rish Lakish says, which is very similar. Amar Rish Lakish. It's just going to be in the category of, in the case of Truma and not Avodah Zarah. And then we're going to have to say, why do we need both? Okay, why wouldn't you have been able to learn one from the other? But he's going to say the exact same thing as Rav Nachman. Chavit shel Truma. Again, a barrel of Truma. We're talking about a barrel of Truma wine, which is obviously significant, so it's not going to be batel. Shenitarva b'mea chaviyot. Now, usually in laws of Truma, 1 to 100 will work. If you have 100 chulin, it will cancel out the Truma. But in this case, okay, now one thing you have to know, if you have 100 against 1, you can benefit from all those 100, but one of them you're going to have to give to a Kohen, because we know that one is Truma, so you randomly take one and you give to the Kohen. Okay, just remember that in your head, because we're going to relate to that in a bit of a different way in a bit. So a chavit of Truma, that's I want to say it's batel, but it's not completely nullified. You can't benefit from all 101, assuming you're not a Kohen, right? You have to give it to a Kohen. So you give any one to a Kohen, and then you're good. The rest are fine. But here, we don't have Dine Bitul because it's a barrel, and it's significant. V'nafla achat mehem liyam hamelach. But just like the ring, one of them falls into the Dead Sea. I'm trying to imagine, right? This barrel of wine falling into the Dead Sea. Wouldn't it float, right? But I'm assuming what happens is when it fell in, it probably opened and spilled, okay? So it falls into the Dead Sea, okay? Or I wonder, there's a note here, yeah. There's a note that changes it to the Yam HaGadol, okay, where it would sink. Okay, that would be the Mediterranean. Okay, so anyway, it falls into the water. Hutru kulan. Okay, it doesn't matter which body of water. They're obviously talking about the bodies of water that were familiar to them. So everything else is permitted. Da'amrinan hachta nafal, d'isur nafal. So exactly like Rav, which we said was all like Rabbi Eliezer. You can assume the one that fell is the problematic one, and the rest are permitted. Ve'itzrich Rav Nachman ve'itzrich. So again, we can't use laws of nullification, but this is a different thing, right? That we can permit. Based on if one falls, we can assume that was the problematic one and it permits everything else. Itzrich to Rav Nachman, Itzrich to Rish Lakish. Why do we need them both? To Imi to Rav Nachman, again, difference is Avodah Zarah and Truma, okay? Or ring and barrel, we're going to see, okay? There's two differences between them. So if you learn from Rav Nachman, who talked about the barrel of the ring of Avodah Zarah, Hava Mina, Hanimili Avodah Zarah, to Ein Lamitirim. Now, Avodah Zarah is permitted to benefit from. So if we don't permit this, we're going to have 101 rings or however many rings that are all forbidden. So, and there's nothing to do with them. There's no way to fix them. So maybe we'll be more lenient, right? So it's ironic. In a more stringent case where it's forbidden to benefit, we actually might be more lenient. We saw this with the korbanot before. We might be more lenient, or you might have thought we'd be more lenient because there's no way out. Okay? But, right, we compared before the Yisrael of the animals, which have to be left to die. Maybe we'd be more lenient there so that they don't all die. But aval truma de yesh lamitirim lo. Now, what would I do? I have 101 barrels of truma. I can't benefit from them, but well, the truth is, I can't eat them or drink them. But what can I do? I can benefit. I can sell them. Now, what do I sell them? Well, I take a loss because there's something called demei truma. I can sell them for the price of truma in the market. Truma goes for less money in the market because there's less demand on it. Most people don't want truma, only kohanim. So I'll lose some money on it, but I will be able to sell it. Okay, again. One barrel I'll have to give to a Kohen, and the rest of them I can sell for a lower price, but at least I won't have to lose them all. So maybe we'd say there we don't use this solution. And that's why Rish Lakish had to say, no, we still do. Now that was the differentiate between Avodah Zarah and Truma. But now we're going to differentiate between ring and barrel. Even to Rish Lakish, if you had the case just of this barrel, you might say, Hava mina chavit diminker on filata. Now if a barrel falls into the sea, people are going to know about it. It's a big thing. People are going to see, people are going to talk about it, people will know, and then they'll understand that's why we permitted the rest of your barrels. Aval tabat lo min karana filata, no, lo. But a ring, no one's going to notice that ring fell in. And what are they going to see? Okay, no. This assumes they saw that the ring of Avodah Zarah fell into your other rings, but assuming they know you have an issue here. And then all of a sudden they see you benefiting from them, right? You go sell them in the shuk, people are going to say, what's going on here? How do you permit this? Right? And they'll think that you could, now, what will they think? They'll think that you could permit based on maybe laws of majority. So since they won't know that that ring fell in, and we can rely on the fact that the ring fell in the water because no one will notice a ring falling in the water, therefore, you might have thought that we won't permit this solution. But Rish Lakish says, no, we do anyway. And I'm sorry, Rav Nachman says we do anyway, and that's why you need Rav Nachman. I'm a Rabba. Now we're going to have a bit of a machloket based on this issue we just mentioned about it being noticeable, about what Rish Lakish says about this. I'm a Rabba lo hitir Rish Lakish ala chavit min karana filata aval te'ena lo. Now Rabba says, even though Rav Nachman said it by a ring, but Rish Lakish, who specifically talked about a barrel, Rabba says he only permits a barrel. That's why he said barrel. But if a fig of truma fell into the water, that wouldn't help you, right? If you had a whole thing of figs, 1 in 101, we wouldn't permit the fig because no one would notice it. Barrel, yes, not this. Rabbi Yosef disagrees and says, Yosef amar afilu teina kenefilata kachaliata. This is a very interesting line, and I can argue against it in a second, but we'll hear in a minute. The way it fell in and forbade, that's the way it could fall out and permit. Okay? So it's like, it reminds me of kibolo kachpolto, the way a kashrus, right? It gets absorbed in that way, it can leave that way. So if one falls into a mixture, it messes it up. So one falls out, it resolves it. Now, it doesn't matter, right, whether they see it or don't see it. But you could also, right, we usually say, and it's definitely true in these kind of cases, that it's very easy to break something. It's much harder to fix it, right? So you could say against him, and I guess that's why Rabbi says, right? It doesn't work so simply like that, right? One can forbid an entire mixture. It's not so easy to remove that so simply. Okay, and again, you have to remember, these are all according to Rabbi Eliezer, who's very lenient in this area and permits these. Not everybody permits them, but you do see it kind of became somewhat mainstream. Rav said it, right? Rav Nachman quoted Rav as saying it. Rish Lakish says it. That even though we started saying it's kind of this, rare opinion, but it seems to have taken off. Amar, and you can see they're trying to permit all sorts of bad situations to happen to people, right? Where all of a sudden one forbidden thing gets mixed up in this big thing, and we have a huge problem on our hands. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, chavit shel truma shenafla b'mea chaviyot. So now we have one barrel that falls into 100, just like the previous, but now we're going to talk about a different, not where one fell into the sea, okay? Now, what's the problem? Now we're highlighting a different issue. It's not batel in the, right, even though you have 100 against the one, because it's important, it's significant. Now, a barrel can become insignificant if it gets opened, okay? That already reduces its importance, because it's already open barrel of wine isn't so important anymore, because it has to be drunk soon. So potech echad mehem. So comes Rabbi Eliezer and says, this is Rabbi Eliezer the Amora, and he says, I have a solution. Let's just open it, and then no tell it. Okay, now we have to go back to what I said about you have to give part of it to the Kohen. So now you have to think with halachic glasses on, okay, and not reality glasses. Let's talk reality first. In reality, we have 101 barrels. One is completely truma, and the rest are completely not truma, right? They have no truma in them whatsoever. Now, what he says is if we open one of them, that one becomes insignificant. It becomes nullified to the rest, okay? And we can at least drink the wine in that barrel. Okay, that barrel becomes permitted now because it's batel to the 100 others. So again, either the barrel that now we're permitting is completely truma or none of it is truma. But that's not really important because what they're going to say is, we're going to allow laws of nullification. Halachically, we're going to say this is batel. But now when we say batel, it doesn't mean it's erased completely. So now if we look at those 101 barrels, what percentage of them is truma? 1 out of 101, out of all of them, right? So now we're going to look at this barrel as an independent unit, that 1 out of 101 of it theoretically could be truma. Now it can't actually be truma because it's either all truma or it's nothing as truma. But we're going to say the following. As I said before, when we have dine bitul in barrels like this, or truma, whatever it is, and we write barrels, usually we don't have bitul, so don't you say barrels, but let's say we have a little wine spills into a bigger barrel of wine. So we'll say laws of bitul apply, but you still have to give a little bit to the Kohen, the part that was originally the Kohen's part, because otherwise you're stealing from a Kohen. So since we're permitting this, we're really only permitting 100 of it, not the 101. So you have to take, of this barrel, 1 out of 101 has to be given to a Kohen. And then you can drink the rest. That's what he says here. So number one, he allows you to open it and already say, oh, this is no longer important. And then, no telling mena kedei dimu'ah. Dimu'ah is how to fix the truma issue. So you take 1 out of 101 of here, give it to a Kohen, v'shoteh, and then you can drink the rest of it. So in other words, without taking that 1 out of 101, okay, but remember, it definitely doesn't have 1 out of 101 of Truma in here. It either has nothing or it has 100%. But that's the halachic solution because we look at it as part of the big, all these 101 barrels. Okay, so percentage-wise, right, proportionally, we're going to have to give that amount to the Kohen if you want to drink that 1 barrel. Yativ Rav Dimi v'ka'amar la lahashmata. Now Rav Dimi starts teaching this halacha. Rav Dimi is a Nechuti. He's one of the people that goes down to Babylonia from Israel. So Rabbi Eliezer is in Israel. Rav Dimi goes to Babylonia and starts teaching what Rabbi Eliezer said. Amar le Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says, what are you talking about? Gima ushtek chazina hacha. I see this is like somebody taking advantage. It was significant, and then you opened it and made it insignificant? How could you do that? You can't do that. And La Ema, so Rav Dimi says, fine, let's change it. Or maybe Rav Nachman changes. Somebody adapts what Rabbi Eliezer said and says, Niftecha echad mehem. No telling me, only if it opened up. Not if you opened it yourself. You can't go ahead and open it and say, oh, I'm lowering its significance. Okay? But you basically, if it happens, then already its significance is lessened. You can say laws of bitul apply, and any of the barrels that open are now going to be permitted based on laws of bitul, as long as you give the truma to the kohen. Amar Rabbi Yoshai. Now we're going to have another law, kind of outgrowth of this, or another situation similar but a little different. Chavit shel truma, and this is going to be the end of all our dine tarovot for right now. Okay, of like this type. Rabbi Yoshai says, Chavit shel truma shenit arva b-150 chaviyot. So we have 1 barrel of truma. It gets mixed up with 100, with another, 1 barrel and 150. Because this time we have 151. V'niftechu mea mehen, although they're really going to talk about really 150. It's probably like 100 and 149. In a minute you'll see why they're doing this, because you really only need 100, right? 101 altogether. Niftechu mea mehen. Now what if, here we're going to get into majority. What if the majority of them opened up and they were all bata? Okay, so the majority, we have 100 that are bata. We're left with 50 that are sealed. The laws of bitul don't apply to them. This is going to sort of bring everything together that we've learned today. Okay, so first of all, the 100, you can take off 1 out of 101 of each one, right, of the contents of that 1 barrel, those 100, give to the kohen, and you're good. Ushar, what about the other 50? Asurin ad shiftachu. There's nothing you can do about them. Now, what might you have thought? He says, lo amrinan isur beruba ite. Now, if you remember, it doesn't connect to everything we learned, but we did have that case, if you remember, with the 40 and the 60. And we said you can assume it was in the 60, right? So now, if you have 50 left, now, again, this is all in the world of halachic reality, not real reality. We permitted the other 100, okay? On the other hand, at this point, we have 50 that are forbidden, and we have 100 that we permitted. But now you have 50, which is the minority. So can't you just say, isn't it obvious the Isser is in the 100? Because the Isser is in the majority. Okay, we don't say that, he says. Now, why we don't say that? Good question, and you can read the commentaries on this. It's a whole big question why he doesn't say this, but he says, we don't allow this. Okay, we don't allow you to say, oh, well, now at this point, after we permitted, you can see why it also becomes ridiculous, right? We permitted the 100, and now we're going to say, oh, for sure, the prohibited one must have been in there, right? The truma one must have been in there. So we don't allow that. Okay, now we're going to go back to our Mishnah, and we're going to have some other types of questions. So we're finished with, like I said, for right now anyway, laws of majority and statistical majority and how we can totally assume this one was that. Okay, now we're going to go back to the Rovev and Yirba, the second category in the Mishnah. We're done with the Chataot HaMeitot, the ones and the Shor Niskal. Gets forbidden with Isurei Hana'ah, they all have to be left to die. Second category was, they're with items that just can't go on the altar. So what do? You let them graze till they get blemished. Then you take the most expensive one that you sell them all. Take the most expensive one, use that for your sacrifice, assuming, or however many sacrifices you had. You take the most expensive animals, buy sacrifices with them, and then the rest are just regular chulin. They just don't go on the altar. So now the Gemara asks a question. I get the reality of all these cases, okay? There were a lot of cases they listed there. All of it makes perfect sense. Ela high treifa, right? Now, what makes sense? It makes sense that you could have some sort of combination. If an animal engaged in bestiality, okay, the animal looks the same before and after. You can't tell the difference. You can't tell whether it engaged bestiality or not. Same with all the other cases. But a treifa, what's a treifa? A treifa is an animal that has a broken leg or something like that. How do you end up high treifa echidami? Either it's a noticeable treifa, in which case you just take it out. You know which one's the treifa. It's obvious. And lo yadale. Now, if you don't know, there's a lot of times where a treifa, they only figure it out once they slaughter the animal, that there was something inside. Well, right now we're talking about live animals. So, minayada diarev. How do you even know it's a treifa? You don't know until it's slaughtered. This hasn't been slaughtered. So how do you know? So the treifa case makes absolutely no sense that it's here in the Mishnah. We're now going to have three answers to this question. And then we're going to say, why doesn't each one agree with the other? Like, what's the weakness in each position? Amri debe Rabbi Yanai. Hacha b'mayaskinan. Within this mixture of animals, we have ones that were punctured by a thorn. They got a hole in their hide because of a thorn, and others that were attacked by a wolf, which also were pierced. Okay, so they look the same. Rish Lakish Amar, Kigondi Arev Benefula, one that fell off from a high place, which is a type of treifa, fell off. Even if you don't have any noticeable signs of being a treifa, you're called a treifa. Okay, so if you fall off from an animal falls from a height, it's not noticeable, but okay, so now they say in the Fulanami, livdika, understand, check it out. See if it's really damaged or not. You don't just become a nefula just because you fell off. You could come out of the fall perfectly fine. So Kasavar, the author of our Mishnah, must hold that it was a nefula and if it stood up immediately, you still have to wait 24 hours. It's not noticeable right away. Or if it walks right away, it still needs to be checked. Okay? And that usually they do the check after it's dead already. So there might be a problem here. You just won't know for a long time. So that's why it's not necessarily noticeable. Rabbi Yomi Amar, third answer, Kigondi Arab Bivlad Treifa, gets mixed up with the offspring of a Treifa. And he must hold Rabbi Eliezer, back to Rabbi Eliezer in his unique positions. Damar Vlad Treifa lo yikrav l'gabei mizbeach. He claims that the Vlad of a treifa, the offspring of a treifa, can't be brought on the altar. Now, the offspring of a treifa looks no different, right? Just because the mother was a treifa doesn't mean the offspring is a treifa. So that would be cases where you wouldn't notice. Now, kulu Rabbi Yanai lo amre. Why didn't they say like Rabbi Yanai? Because bein kubarakotz the drusad azev made a yada mashich by agil. They look different, right? A thorn is a perfect circle. A laceration from a wolf is going to be more elongated. Kirish Lakish lo amre kasavar amdai natzricha me'eleit hachai natzricha b'dika. Well, there's debates about this, and the others who didn't hold like Rish Lakish is because they hold that if it stood up, then it's not a treifa, and if it walked, then it's not a treifa. You don't need to check it later. Rabbi Yirmiyah lo amre, because Rabbi Eliezer lo mukmin, because he held like that outlier opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, and nobody holds that way about a vlad treifa. Okay, the others didn't hold that way. Okay, last line for today has to do with women. Kodshim bekodshim min bimino. Next case, we have olod and olod, let's say. So what do? If you remember, we sacrifice them both and just say whoever this was for, right? The Kohen brings it and says, this is for whoever owner. Comes the Gemara and says, Vahabai smicha. What about smicha on the korban? The owner's supposed to do smicha. I can't do smicha on your korban. You can't do smicha on my korban. So how are we going to deal with that? Rav Yosef bekorban nashim. He says, korbanot of women, because women aren't obligated in smicha. Why is this a great topic? First of all, it's the big machloket about smicha, about whether nashim are allowed to do smicha if they want. And this leads to a whole big debate. It's one of the main sources for the whole question of, can women opt into doing mitzvot that they're exempt from? Can they make brachot on, right? Here it's not the bracha issue, but that leads to the second question. Can you make a bracha? If a woman sits in a sukkah, can she make a bracha on it? Lulav. Okay, all those things are fascinating. Sugya. It's a shiur of Meirav Tubakan on the Hebrew side of the Beyond the Daf content, if anyone wants to listen. Anyway, they say it's talking about women. So the Gemara says, Aval b'korban nashim lo. Wait, so then this doesn't work? And that means that for korbanot of men that get mixed up, you can't do this. What do you have to do? Leave them to graze, take the money, buy them. Okay? So the Gemara is going to ask about that. We'll get to that tomorrow. So what did we do today? We started with this Rabbi Eliezer's opinion just because we got there about the nidchim, right? And that he seems to say dachui even in shchutim, and that seemed to be a question. And we say, yeah, well, it's an outlier opinion. Okay? And that's based on this Mishnah later in our parak, but that is based on Chanan and Mitzri's opinion that there really is no dichoy by animals. From there, we got into this psak of Rav Nachman in the name of Rav about one of them coming out, that permits the whole thing. From there, we got to another thing about 100 rings and the 40-60 and saying, oh, well, sveka. We had a big machlok at Rav and Shmuel. Do we hold sveka by avodah zarah? And then we saw it was actually a machlok at Tanaim. And that Shmuel kind of fashioned his own opinion within Rabbi Yehuda. And then we did Rish Lakish, who said the same thing as Rav Nachman, but in the Truma case. And then we had to compare why, what were the two differences between them, the Truma avodah zarah versus the issue of barrel versus ring. And then we had this Rabbi Eliezer, who basically said, if you have all these barrels, you can undo the chashivut, to which they said you definitely can't undo it. But if it gets undone, then you can do beetle. You just have to give a part to the Kohen, so you're not stealing from him. And then we got to the Raveh and Nirba, and really we were talking about the Treifa case. 3 explanations to what the Treifa case is and why each one didn't hold like the other. And we finished with this issue of smicha, which we'll continue with tomorrow. Wishing everyone a good day.